Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to discuss the short story The Jaunt by Stephen King. Originally published in his well, not originally published, but it was included in his collection of short stories called Skeleton Crew. So what is The Jaunt about? Well, let's go into what this story is about. We start with a family in a futuristic airport, 300 years in the future. There's a man, his wife, his younger daughter, and his younger son. They're on their way to Mars for the first time. Except people in the future don't use rocket ships to travel to Mars. They use what's called the jaunt. The jaunt is a form of teleportation. You can go instantaneously between any 2 points that are connected by the jaunt. It's, however, considering that it's his wife and his son and his daughter's first time, they're very nervous. So the father decides to tell them the story of how the jaunt was originally created. The jaunt was originally created 300 years in the past from this time, and by a scientist called Karun. Karun was working out of a dilapidated barn, working on a shoestring budget from the government. He was horribly worried about losing his funding because he'd been working on this teleportation device for a very long time with absolutely nothing to show for it. So he was getting very nervous. And during this time that he was working on it, there was a huge energy crisis because oil was running out. It was becoming very expensive. There were entire countries with no oil that they could possibly use, and he knew that if he could come up with a way of doing this teleportation, he would be able to solve this crisis. So has been working on. Earlier in the day, he had bought a box full of mice from the local pet store. And as he enters his barn and puts the box of mice down, he happens to stick his hand out and notices that half his fingers have disappeared and they're sticking out of the other end of the device that he's created. He's very nervous about it because obviously you would think that he cut his fingers off. He pulls them back and realizes that the fingers are still there. They feel completely normal. They still work exactly how they're supposed to. Did he actually create this incredible device that would solve all of our energy problems and all of our travel problems? Well, he decides to do a couple more tests. He throws his watch through, makes sure that there's absolutely no time differential on it. He tries throwing the keys through and make sure that the keys can still open up the door. He throws through a calculator. 2 plus 2 still equals 4, doesn't equal 5. So, he realizes that the jaunt does not actually cause any problems with the internal structure of the things going through it. So, of course, the next step is to send mice through. He sends a mouse through it. It enters as a normal frisky mouse, squealing, running around, and when it comes out the other side, it just sits there, breathing rapidly, and then keels over and dies. Not a good sign. So, not thinking anything of it, Karun just puts the mouse in a bag and decides to try a second one. He feeds it through slowly. Same result. Just sits there with a shocked look and then dies. He can't quite understand what's going on. Is there a pressure differential? Is there some sort of like horrible temperature differential? Yet when he throws through a thermometer, it doesn't show any differences. If he puts through a balloon, it doesn't pop. There's no reason why these mice should be dying. So he picks up a third mouse and tries to put it through, and it just happens to move so that he starts putting it through. He decides to put it through butt first, only halfway. No problems. The mouse is perfectly normal until it goes all the way through, at which point it just sits there and then dies. Karun decides to go to a biologist friend of his for dissection of the mice that had died. And after dissecting it, the biologist says there's no differences, internal differences in these mice. There's no reason why they should have died. So, obviously there's something about going through this. So Karun records his discovery. The government comes in, takes it over. And, in short order, and Karun becomes basically just a figurehead with no real input into it. But it's discovered that people only die, beings only die, if they go through conscious. If they go through unconscious, they're perfectly fine. So basically, that we've solved the problem. We can go anywhere where there's the other end of a portal by jaunting instantly with absolutely no energy problems at all, as long as we're asleep, asleep while we go through. Of course, that leads to a serious question. How come it causes death if you go through when you're conscious? So we enlist the aid of a convicted murderer. Figure at worst he's going to die anyway. We might as well put him through and see if he can tell us what's there. And if he survives, we promise him a full pardon. We send him through. He comes through after going through conscious with a head of white hair, and all he says is it's eternity in there, and then dies. So it's decided that every time anybody uses the jaunt for commercial activity, we'll simply gas them, put them to sleep, basically put them in a coma. Then we'll revive them when they come through the other side. Not really a problem. And of course, at this point, the father, telling this story, notices that the people that are putting people to sleep before they go through the jaunt are almost to his family. So just to prove that the gas is perfectly safe, he takes the gas, goes to sleep. He wakes up on the other side on Mars, on the Mars colony, to the sound of screaming, the sound of horrible screaming and a cackling voice. He sits up, and then he realizes it's coming from his son who has white hair and is screaming at the top of his lungs. It's longer than you think, Daddy. Much longer. I held my breath. It's eternity in there. And as they wheel the son away, that's where the story ends. I'll tell you, this is one of Stephen King's most chilling short stories. Stephen King is a master of the short story format. He always has been. And when he does a Lovecraftian riff like this, which is really what this is, because basically it's asking the question, when you go through, you become just pure consciousness. What does pure consciousness feel like when it's going through and apparently an eternity of eternities, and then it comes through and you shock back into normal reality? It would obviously drive anybody insane. It would cause them to die from shock almost immediately. It would be horrible. But think about the time that your consciousness would be left to itself in maybe just a endless white void with no features, nothing but your own consciousness to keep yourself company. and you were there for an eternity of eternities. Kind of a chilling idea. Honestly, The Jaunt is one of Stephen King's most scary short stories. And that's saying a lot because Skeleton Crew also includes The Mist in it. So, pick up pick up Skeleton Crew, give it a read. I just wanted to do a quick review of a short story this week. Anyway, have a great day and try to be asleep next time you get on a plane. Bye-bye.